Let's go. Ohne Vertrag. Nichts, gar nichts. Hammer. Wenn mal mehrere Firmen danach gehen würden. Nach diesem Spruch, nach diesem Leitspruch. Wunderschönen guten Tag zu diesem kleinen neuen Reaction-Video hier auf dem Kanal. Ich sag's gleich am Anfang, damit die Leute nicht enttäuscht sind. Aber Valve hat vor knapp 3 Stunden zum Zeitpunkt dieser Aufnahme, Samstagnacht, eine einstündige Dokumentation über Half-Life rausgebracht zum 25-jährigen Jubiläum. Ja, Half-Life 1 ist schon 25 Jahre alt. Mann. Ich erinnere mich noch, wie ich es auf meinem Pentium 166 mit, oh Gott, 8 bis 10 Frames gespielt habe auf niedrigsten Details, aber ich habe es trotzdem gezockt und ich hatte richtig Bock drauf. Es war damals so ein absolutes High-End-Game, kann man sich heute nicht mehr vorstellen. Aber ich bin gespannt, was Valve hier droppen wird. Viele haben ja vermutet zum 25-jährigen Jubiläum, dass da vielleicht Half-Life 3 angekündigt wird, aber offensichtlich nicht. Wir schauen mal rein. Ich hab Bock drauf.
You just go over the mountains over here and you're in high desert. You get past Ellensburg and it's high desert. So I spent a lot of time out there getting
Krass, die
reference.
Fotos, Alter.
Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington. I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos and also a lot of just reference imagery of just like, hey, this is what desert looks like and big cliffs and stuff like that. That drive was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and
Alter, es ist einfach nur Standbilder.
I must have spent the night down there. So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out in the Columbia Gorge.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This
Ich
automated
hab die ganze Zeit
train is
Gänsehaut.
provided for the
die
security
ganze Zeit
and
Gänsehaut,
convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
Valves First Game, das erste Spiel Half-Life. Geil. So lief das bei mir nicht und schon gar nicht in der Auflösung. Geil. Die sprechen mit dem Original-Development-Team zum Erstellen vom Original Half-Life. Ich hab gerade richtig Gänsehaut, Leute.
My name is Mike Harrington. I was co-founder at Valve. I wasn't really used to big companies. When I started at Microsoft, it wasn't that big. It was like 1,500 people, like a big high school. 9 years later, it was significantly bigger. I'm thinking, oh, this place is too big. And that was still like 1996. So
Das war noch geile
to
Zeiten.
go. I told my managers like a year before, like I'm leaving in a year and I'm going to start a game company. And
Ja, du hast damals bei Microsoft so viel Geld durch Aktien und durch Einkommen verdient, dass du Millionär wurdest. Geil. Und die haben es genutzt.
And the first person I talked to was a good friend of mine, Michael Abrash. But at that time, he was trying to do something within Microsoft, and by the time it made sense, John Carmack had convinced him to go work at id. So how could he say no to that? And then I was having lunch with Gabe, and I said, Gabe, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave, and I'm going to start a game company. He goes, I want to leave. I want to start a game company. I go, all right, and that was it.
On the surface, we should have failed. And realistically, both Mike and I thought we would get about a year into it, realize we'd made horrible mistakes and go back to our friends at Microsoft and ask for our jobs back. But we did think that we knew a fair bit about software development, that there were expertise that goes into it. I think we also had some pretty clear ideas of how to design a company, right? So when we were building Half-Life, we were also designing Valve at the same time.
We had no plan except for, by then, like I mentioned, Michael had gone to id. And he said, oh, you're starting a game company, you have to use our engine. So Gabe and I flew down to Mesquite to meet id. We spent a good deal of time with John Romero, and he told
Und die
us,
haben
like,
95% von dieser Quake-Engine umgeschrieben.
You need to go out and hire
Das
some
muss man
level
sich mal geben,
designers and do that kind of thing. And we kind of understood
Half-Life
the
zu
engineering part.
erschaffen.
And then, because we were Michael's friends, we walked away with the source code to Quake that day. We had no contract yet. We had kind of an idea of what it could be. And they just gave us a CD, and we had kind of the crown jewels of id, and that, game on.
Wie geil das einfach ist, die Zeit, wo die Leute einfach mal gesagt haben, ihr habt den Quellcode von der Quake-Engine, let's go. Ohne Vertrag, nichts, gar nichts. Hammer.
I think most of us had no game development experience. We were either amateurs working in our homes at night for fun, or some people were from the software world, but they had never worked on a game. I think we had 3 or 4 people in the entire company who had actually shipped a game when we started Half-Life. We have to figure out what is Valve's first game. So we have to come up with an IP. So everything is done from scratch.
Gabe came into the office and he said, I read this story. I read this Stephen King story called The Mist. You know, Stephen King, it's got monsters, you know, people in a grocery store, fog comes in, monsters in the fog, you know, use your imagination. We didn't want to write that as a game. That wasn't really the point, but it was just the tension and, you know, how it felt.
Well, it was interesting. At first, we had 2 games. Greg was working Prospero, and then Half-Life was originally called Quiver.
My job was then
Quiver.
build a team and figure out another game for us to build. That'll be the second game Valve ships. What features should it have? How is it going to be different from a normal first-person shooter?
Every time the engine got a feature for Prospero, Half-Life stole it. And then Half-Life just started getting visually, you know, more impressive and...
Alien Organic Chainsaw. Alter, die Zeichnung, ich meine, das hier sieht so ein bisschen geil aus, aber der Rest sieht aus, als hätte das irgendein 12-Jähriger gemalt oder so. Und nichts gegen 12-Jährige, aber ich sag's mal so, das das krieg ich nicht hin. Schlopp. Geil. Ah, herrlich.
cooler, and eventually it just, because it was going to ship sooner, it just stole the resources from Prospero, and Prospero just faded away.
I had this character, had like a floating orb, and it wanted to have some, effects on it. It's kind of magical energy, something. And so I worked with them on that and came up with the first version of the beam effects. And they were using it, they were happy with it. And then people on Half-Life are coming over and like, what is that? How did you do that? So very quickly that got into Half-Life. The disaster sequence has kind of beam effects all over it, and we ended up using it for the Vortigons.
Das ist jetzt, glaube ich, aber schon die Source-Version.
Like there are a bunch of things that
Also
we're doing
Half-Life
that we
Source,
thought
halt
would
mit
help
den
us tackle the
überarbeiteten
problem
Effekten,
of what video
die sie
games were.
damals
And what
zu
video
Half-Life
games
2
were
rausgebracht
a
haben,
rapidly
parallel.
changing field where at the time 90% of video games failed to turn a profit. And a few percentage of them were very, very profitable, right? So it was a field that really valued talent.
Like I said, Gabe and I brought some people, and then, from there on out, we had to hire people. And, Romero said you got to hire level designers. So, we found some people who had industry experience.
Worked on Rise of the Triad first as a pixel artist.
At a Rise
and then
of the
went
Triad,
with Duke Nukem, and then everything just went nuts. But I was sitting in my office one day, and my phone rang, just out of the blue, and I pick it up, and it's this recruiter. Eventually, he hooked me up with Gabe, and they flew me up here. It was a big surprise.
But then we started looking, the nice thing that we had is we had a whole bunch of people in the world who had been working on mods, and so we could start looking at those folks. And that's where we hired a lot of our designers.
Und so geht das halt nun mal. Wenn du gute Leute aus der Mod-Szene hast, Alter, komm, gib denen doch mal eine Chance. Die haben ja offensichtlich eine Ahnung von Spieldesign. Also...
Steve Bond, John Guthrie were my favorite hires by far.
Other than Doug.
Gabe sent them an email and they're like, who is this scammer? Never heard of these guys. Just kids, like barely 20, I swear. And they show up and they're just the most creative, brilliant. Clever. Fucking clever. Steve had the magic ability to make stuff fun.
The fact that those guys have been hired to go work on some game for some company, I think that was the start for a lot of people that something cool was going to happen, because those guys were already doing stuff that was cool.
And then Mark showed up, and Mark actually knows how stories work, beginning, middle, end, and all this stuff. And,
Diese riesen
and he
Monitore,
had
oder?
all sorts of great ideas, and he also would just, bring good ideas out of everybody else as well.
Like the person who wrote more code on Half-Life was a chemistry major who decided to be an IP lawyer in Atlanta, right? And he ended up writing more code than anybody else. Or the creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House. It's not like there are a bunch of people that you could say, oh, this person, you know, has a PhD in video game design. It was that combination of both finding those people when it wasn't necessarily easy to find them at that stage in the video game industry.
Also, ich muss mal sagen, ich glaube, jeder, der damals bei Valve gelandet ist, hat das Glück seines Lebens gehabt. Also ist ja der Wahnsinn. Ich meine, die haben auch gecrunched und so, aber das waren alles Leute, die saßen da und die hatten Bock da drauf. Die hatten keine Verpflichtungen, nichts, gar nichts. Klar, heutzutage ist das Thema empfindlicher und auch gut so, dass es angesprochen wird. Aber die saßen einfach und haben gesagt, nee, bringen wir jetzt durch. Voll geil. Quaiva. Spätes 1996. Oh mein Gott, wie geil. Oh mein Gott, wie geil das aussieht. Reactivity.
One of the things that I definitely learned was how to hire engineers. And you know, we needed some engineers.
For us anyway, we had a licensed IDS engine, you know, we're using the Quake engine. And one of the things me and some of the other engineers, probably Ken, were talking about
footage.
Was if it would be possible to use the save system to kind of like join our levels together in a really seamless way. So you get to the end of the level, save stuff, and then load some of it on the next level.
Die Ladezeiten waren so langsam.
The world's all connected.
And so we had like every once in a while a hallway or the train would get to a point and you would have a little stop for the level to transition. And so he wrote that code leveraged on top of just the save load code to do the transitions. And I think in Half-Life 1 we got most of the transitions were, you know, a second or two.
I remember when we went from
ja, auf schnellen Rechnern vielleicht. Auf meinen waren die
we don't have to
Transitions
have all our
20
textures
Sekunden.
fit in a certain, you know, 256 colors. That was a huge liberation.
The two tech investments we made for Half-Life was to get to 16-bit color and skeletal animation for all the monsters.
But at the time it was completely revolutionary. Your Quake characters were, it's like a text file of vertex positions over time.
I wanted so much more animation, and I wanted the animators to have the freedom to put in 100, 200, 500 frame of animation, if not more. And then you can do all.
Und vergleich das mal mit den Quake-Monstern, die ihr am Anfang gesehen haben, die irgendwie mit 15 Frames liefen oder vielleicht 10 Frames. Das ist schon.
All sorts of other things, because you have a skeleton, so it's like, oh, I can hook on a gun to a character. I can start to make changes of characters and replay the same animation or reuse most of the same model, so we can swap out heads, we can swap out this, we can swap out whatever.
Like all the technology that went into the game to make it as fun as it is was not available one generation before. So licensing the Quake engine, which was, you know, very mature and had level designers who'd grown up just goofing around with it.
I wasn't heavily into scripting since back into Doom. Like my old Doom levels have a lot of weird, odd events in them. I think I asked Ken, is it possible that I could have access to the character's animation, like a trigger? Like what I mentioned, I could make the guys go into an animation, I could make them run, and then I would configure everything. It was all hack. This is total hacky stuff.
Und wir haben auch in unserem Podcast drüber gesprochen, in unserem Premium-Feed, nerdpodcast.de, über Half-Life haben wir eine Spezialfolge gemacht. Die konnten sogar Gerüche wahrnehmen. Also natürlich in ganz großen Anführungszeichen. Aber das ist einfach technisch so viel weiter als das, was die Quake Engine ursprünglich daraus gemacht hat.
And that is mostly what I built. It was like things like characters reacting and jumping out are made to look like, or I'd use a push brush to throw a head crab out to make it look like it launched at something.
Or if a loud sound happened,
they would respond,
would cower.
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen like every 3 to 5 seconds. Yeah. The player stands still, the
didn't have to be much.
Universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play back something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just
a sound or some vignette or something. So I came up with this interaction method where you could do little AIs where the characters would talk and interact with you a little bit. And then we wanted to do spectacle, and that was scripted sequences where you could tell a character, you need to run here and then jump into this animation. and then have a bunch of you all synchronize.
Der Polygon-Count, Alter.
Somebody flying through the air, they're smashing something, or they're doing something like that.
And then test it and figure out, like, oh, this is real easy to break. That was the roughest thing about scripted sequences, where you'd have like a head crab jumping on a scientist or something, and it's like, yeah, it works totally fine 90% of the time, but some people just sprint right at the scientist, and sometimes we have to put them behind glass. And
sometimes getting the level designers making the player want to do the thing that gives them the most fun is a very subtle art.
The tentacle sequence is probably the one I remember the most.
You're playing it, right? That was the first
PlayStation
time
1 Version hier.
Because you had your trigger
so closely,
and we wanted it to be triggered. So by the time you start to see it, you see the scientist flying through the air and hitting the wall. Then you could look in and you could see the scientist being carried away. The tentacle itself is separate; it's on its own, and you bring the two together, mesh them together, and boom.
It felt so seamless, though, and that for me is like. Moments like that, and that might have been the first one, is when you start to see the scripted events and play start to blend a little bit more than just ambience.
For God's sake, open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our only way out! Oh my God, we're doomed!
I remember Brett in particular had done some of the lab scenes where scientists would walk from one area to another and just look at a monitor. And it gave them a little bit of life. A ton of the work that went into that area was because we knew it was going to be the beginning of the game, and we really needed to make it a vibrant and interesting, fun place to be and explore.
So originally they were designed to sort of be behind glass. They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm going to put that right in front of you. I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this be behind glass? They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
America! oder sind die Waffen extra für Videospiele? Lol, Alter, das fällt mir jetzt erst auf.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm going to put that right in front of you. And I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this work? It's not supposed to do it.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
The run speed for the player was so insane.
Yeah.
It was like, what, 25 miles an hour or something?
It was sprinting.
You could get so far, so fast.
Yeah.
And so you'd either have to make the scripted sequence like so quick that you could barely see what's happening. Most people weren't looking in the right place anyway, so you'd have to like get their attention with like a particle or a sound or lighting or something, and then you wanted them to see what was happening. But when we play tested,
und ich finde, die Doku bringt das
it's
auch
like a
richtig gut
scientist
rüber.
was like being pulled into a vent or something. Like people wouldn't just stop and like, oh, sometimes they would be like, oh wow, look at that. They just run straight ahead and just start shooting.
It's hard when you think back to it to recognize that those kind of interactive moments were so new. Like people just hadn't seen them.
It was worth it because no other games were doing that. No other games had that interactivity. No other games had that spectacle playing out in front of you.
Ich weiß noch, wie das monatelang in der GameStar damals previewed wurde. Und die waren immer total begeistert. Und ich war halt von den ersten Screenshots gar nicht begeistert, weil ja Unreal auch zu der Zeit rauskam. Aber diese Interaktivität, die das Spiel bot und diese ganzen geskripteten Sequenzen und so, war komplett neu. Und das als erstes Projekt von Valve. Wahnsinn.
And it just added that whole feel of Half-Life.
5-mal gestorben.
Started to develop this theory around interactivity, and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist. The world is acknowledging all of your actions. And that's this huge part of reinforcement.
Dabei bist du dann die schwache Nudeln für die Experimente.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? You know, in behavioral science, you would say we're explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions.
So überlebt man das.
The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it is like, to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices, yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Schon visionär, würde ich mal sagen, ne? Und dass er auch selbst daran halt hauptsächlich beteiligt war und nicht nur delegiert hat, finde ich.
Ted and I, we were on the same page in terms of what the game should look like, which would be just sort of alien in a very naturalistic kind of way. Like these are creatures from another dimension, another planet that look like they evolved in a way, and Chuck had he came from Duke Nukem. He made a bunch of monsters that went in a sort of a different direction, and for a while the game had a hard time coalescing around a single vision.
All the ones that looked like genitals were Ted's. And all the ones with shiny bits that looked like alien soldiers were Chuck's.
That was a thing when I first came in, Ted's style and mine.
Trying to figure that out.
Trying to find the harmony between the two to make it work.
Yeah.
Ted he really liked the Wayne Barlow aesthetic, and I had a little bit different, but it worked. Ted made these really weird. He did the head crab. You know, that's pretty much the symbol of it.
Ich frage mich ja immer, was die Leute für Sachen nehmen, damit die auf so eine Ideen kommen. Das entsteht doch nicht einfach so, oder?
At all. And I remember taking his head crab and putting it on a scientist and making the zombie. Right. Well, we pretty much we talked, and it's like, okay, you do that, and Ted did the soldiers, I did the scientists, I did a lot of the aliens, and with the Hornet gun, I did the Hornet gun for that one as well too. You know, the alien slave. Well, I did some animations for the bull squid or bull chicken. I have to call him that. But that's a Ted creature there. The hound eye was Ted's as well.
Yeah, a lot of the fleshy. If it's got a lot of flesh on it, maybe too much.
Yeah, that's a Tedism.
You can always tell Ted's designs because they're much more aquarium than aquarium and/or like unspeakables.
Oh, Big Mama! I forgot about Big Mama. Oh God!
It's a testicle, right? It's like
so disturbed.
I concepted a guy in sort of a NASA spacesuit, a scientist guy. He was actually modeled after a couple of programmers I know, big, beefy, bearded Linux programmers, And so that's where the HEV suit sort of emerged out of. There was a lot of desire for not having a space marine or a soldier be the guy. And then Chuck Jones went off and did a pretty different version of him that became known as Ivan the Space Biker.
Oh God.
Ivan
I remember telling myself, it's like anytime you make a screenshot, make sure it's good, because you don't know where this is going to appear again.
We didn't know that.
And Ivan is the prime example of that one. Sure, so you're looking at go look at Quake. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that, and he's got this incredibly boxy head. And you're always hearing, don't put too many polys in it. And it's like, okay, so Ivan got the square head, and it was kind of an early, just a rough prototype of a Gordon Freeman baby.
Alter, die hätten sich damals die Mühe gemacht, so einen Bart zu programmieren. Ich meine, die hättest ja im Großteil vom Spiel nicht gesehen, aber es wäre, wow. Gordon Freeman. Ja, okay.
And I remember we didn't know what Gordon looked like. So it's like I was looking for somebody, and I found Mike Harrington. It's like, Mike, what does Gordon look like? I don't know. Put yourself in there. It's like, oh, okay. And so I went in and put kind of my likeness on the early Gordon model in the game. And it kind of stayed there.
Did you have a ponytail?
Well, I was ex-tattoo artist, so yeah, I definitely had. I don't have anything to work with now, but yeah, that point I had a ponytail on.
If you play the game, you know that it's Chuck. If you play multiplayer and you see the model, it's.
But yeah, if you look on the back of that, there's this little like 4 triangles, and he's got a little ponytail back there. I did the G-Man, and again, that one was Gabe was talking about the cigarette man from X-Files. So we needed our own equivalent of that.
Because after a while, after playing with the game for a long time.
Wer Akte X nicht geguckt hat, es gibt halt den Hauptantagonist, sage ich mal so und mal so. Und der hat immer geraucht. Immer! Und ich glaube, der ist dann auch nie mehr weggekommen davon. Also in seinem Privatleben, meine ich.
People realize, like, hey, we made this character, and just in this one office scene in the beginning, you know, where he's behind the window and he's talking to a scientist or something, and he's like, he looks really creepy. It was late in the day that we thought, oh, okay, well, he's going to be the big bad behind all of this.
Ist übrigens, ich wollte gerade sagen, ist übrigens nicht die erste Szene, sondern den sieht man hier in dieser Einführungsfahrt das erste Mal, in diesem Teil da.
Like, scatter him around in places that you can't get to him. But he's there mysteriously.
There wasn't enough in the beginning of the game. It's like we need another monster. Head crabs weren't enough. It got kind of repetitious. I think I grabbed Ted and said, I need them to do this and this. And so he whipped it out in not much time at all. I'm gonna get the timing just right. And I have no time to do this. I'm just gonna bang it out. And then once it was working, everybody said, "Oh, just go back and sprinkle them back in the maps." And that was
because we introduced them a little earlier than we were planning.
Because they weren't real tough. They weren't supposed to be tough.
But they were ranged.
But they're ranged, and they were fun, and they had a big show, and like that was showing off a bunch of stuff.
Hall-Effekten und so weiter. Das war damals alles revolutionär.
That was it. It was like, okay, I have a week and a half. It was already done, it was already all modeled, already all animated, and the requirement was it couldn't have any new animations and any new anything. So had to come up, I grabbed a bunch of Steve Bond's AI and banged that thing out. I built a level super crude, but it had all the right spacing and all the right heights and all the right, geometry.
Okay, das kann man also spielen. Sieht ein bisschen aus wie die Demo, die sie später rausgebracht haben. Da war ein exklusives Level drin, was man im Originalspiel nicht mehr hatte.
Again, it's just a presentation where this creature gets to shine, this enemy gets to shine, and is your entire focus for that scene. And it's kind of a memorable experience because it just takes place in a different fashion than other encounters, and you get knocked out, and there's all kinds of, like, the lights go out, and you get dragged through a corridor and things. So again, it's something you remember in the game.
Die Lampe, Alter. Alter, diese Scheißviecher.
We just did a lot of playtesting and did a lot of level building and used all of the monsters and used everything that we had developed and started seeing which ones kind of stuck out a little oddly. Like we had the hound eyes that Ted had concepted and Kelly had done great sounds for them. And so they seemed like a very oddly plausible sort of alien creature. And Chuck did what we called the Panther Eye.
Gibt es eigentlich Half-Life-Comics? Fällt mir mal bei diesen ganzen Zeichnungen ein. Ich meine, möglich wäre es ja. Das, was hier natürlich wahrscheinlich in dieser Dokumentation nicht erwähnt wird, ist die deutsche Version von Half-Life. Da wurden die Soldaten gegen Roboter ausgetauscht und die haben sich hingesetzt und mit dem Kopf geschüttelt, wenn sie erschossen wurden. Nun ja.
Is this big Black Panther-looking creature that also just had a big red eye for his face and a big shark fin coming out the back. And design-wise, he seemed like this is a very useful creature. It's like when you design things, you like to have a gradient of difficulty, a gradient of escalation and threat. And so if we had these hound eyes, and yes, this like panther, bigger, scarier looking thing would be more of a threat. It was in the game for a long time and then sort of just worked its way out because folks couldn't find a way to incorporate a creature like that into the environment and make it seem reasonable.
The Stuka bat was, it was something that I did, just another creature from the air. We had the chub toad that we were going to use as a feeding animal to help, and yeah, they had a mechanic to where they were going to use this to distract monsters so you could possibly get by. And it pretty much reached fruition to where we created the object, but then again, time became the factor and it had to get cut.
Krass, ey, wie viel da einfach weggeschmissen wird bei so einer Spieleentwicklung mittlerweile. Und damals schon, in dem Jahr.
I grew up just outside DC, and so there's all these like big, really banal office buildings, and that's kind of the direction I went. So it started becoming a facility. And so I started making these kind of linoleum tiles and the drop ceiling, the concrete block wall, the black and white tile floor.
She was like the texture artist for for most of the game. It's just an overwhelming amount of work.
Originally, I was hand painting all of the textures, and you can really see a shift in some of them where they go from hand painted to photo reference. The photo references are much better. So I was all over Seattle, Harbor Island, Gasworks Park, getting rusty metal things. What can I get good pictures of that is vaguely industrial and interesting to look at, and then how can we use this? And so, sides of boxcars, and I don't know how many hallways in Half-Life are, the side of a train car kind of thing. The Kirkland.
Und warum nicht schärfere Texturen? Warum nicht noch mehr Texturen? Ich glaube, ich war damals mit 32 Megabyte Arbeitsspeicher unterwegs. Die Grafikkarten hatten, wenn du gut warst und eine Voodoo hattest, dann hattest du zwischen 4 und 12 Megabyte.
Costco, a lot of time in the Kirkland Costco, getting just packages of, I don't know why I needed snacks or something.
Alles geklaut. Würde heute alles gesperrt werden wahrscheinlich. Okay, wartet. Da habe ich jetzt was übersprochen.
Snacks or something.
After a year of work, the team was bearing down on the planet release date. Das sollte schon 97 erscheinen. Ups. Aber sie hatten ein Problem.
The first year was all about opportunity, and it wasn't quite as focused. We were finding our footing.
We were getting into the 3 months before supposedly shipping in '97, and it's like, this isn't gelling. This is really not good. This is like, quick knockoff, cash grab, stupid. And
es sieht aber auch noch komplett anders aus. Also man sieht, dass einige Animationen fertig sind und so, aber es wirkt alles sehr statisch im Vergleich zum finalen Produkt.
Let's not do that. There was a lot of disconnect between what all of the different groups were doing, what engineering was doing and what level design was doing and what animation was doing. We had a bunch of monsters that had no plans to get in the game because nobody else was assigned to work on them, and we had a bunch of levels that like, what's supposed to go in here? Oh, I don't know, everybody's gonna do a bunch of stuff, and like, no, that doesn't work that way.
So here we were, all these people doing all these cool things, and everything's just this random collection of, oh, here's a cool moment and a cool this, and and then it's gone, and oh, now on to the next thing. Because the way we were building the game was, every level designer was kind of his own silo, his own universe. And I think that just grew out of our, kind of mod developer roots, but it wasn't cohesive, and it certainly didn't have a strategy for like maximizing any of that stuff.
You must have been in the meeting when we reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room,
right?
And Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor, and we.
Stellt euch mal vor, euer Chef sitzt auf so einem filminspirierten Thron einfach. Ach, wie schön, ey.
For 2 days, he played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment, he turned around, he was like this with his hair, he's going, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail. And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, oh shit, this isn't good.
We were doing our best trying to make this game and the story, and we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them, like, we're not going to ship this, and we realized that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right? We could try to force this thing out the door. But that's not the company we want to be. That's not the people we want to be. That's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
Wenn mal mehrere Firmen danach gehen würden. Nach diesem Spruch, nach diesem Leitspruch, Suck is forever. Also das heißt, wenn du verschissen hast, hast du verschissen. Dann hast du für immer so einen Haken irgendwo im Rücken stecken, sage ich mal, ne? Und das wollen die halt einfach nicht. Und deswegen haben die vielleicht auch die letzten Jahre keine Spiele so wirklich entwickelt, weil sie dachten, gut, wir holen uns jetzt erstmal mit Steam das, was wir brauchen. Und wir gehen momentan das Risiko einfach nicht ein.
And so Kelly and I kind of sat down and sort of tried to take an inventory of all the cool stuff we had built and why weren't we just, building more on top of that. And those discussions kind of led to us building this kind of design cabal process to try to give some cohesion to the game and kind of changing the way we were approaching it.
And so a cabal was a small group of people, multidisciplinary group. There's like an artists, level designers, engineers, and everything in that. And a small team that would write up a spec for a level. There was the arc that Mark had written, so we knew how that fit into the story.
And we got a small group of people together, and we started with the beginning, and we went through literally what map do we need to build to tell us the story we're going to tell. And then
die haben nochmal komplett von vorne angefangen. Dann ist aber schon erstaunlich, dass es 98 rausgekommen ist.
What does that connect to, and what's the next piece and the next piece?
The strongest and most influential thing that came out of them was, to me, the sketches. And they were really the visual meeting notes, right?
We came up with a formula for how that worked. We had a certain percentage of the time where you were fighting, a certain percentage of the time where you're exploring, a certain percentage of the time where you're solving puzzles. And so we could apply that uniformly through the game, and that worked pretty well.
Testing. Everything seems to be in order.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
The whole opening of the game was specifically a reaction to how all the other first-person shooters were, whether they had cutscenes or not. Like sometimes, they would just open without a cutscene, but you're standing in a room with a gun and there's a thing attacking you.
Yeah.
So we could look at examples of all that, and I think there was expectation that that's what Half-Life had to do because every other game was doing it.
I can tell you the number of people who started up the game, were staring at it, and then accidentally bumped their mouse and realized this is live.
Yeah.
And as simple as that sounds, it was mind-blowing for so many people because there was too much going on. This isn't real time, this is a recording,
That was sort of the way we, stumbled through a lot of the new narrative tricks. Was like, well, what can we do that you could do this in a movie or a story, but nobody's.
Genau. Also, die wollten nicht einfach nur eine feste Sequenz machen, sondern die wollten dann wirklich, dass ihr das auch miterleben könnt, indem ihr euch in dieser Sequenz schon bewegen könnt. Und das ist was Neues gewesen damals.
Doing this in first-person shooters.
You're this anonymous scientist and you're riding on this train into work and rolled the credits at the beginning. It was kind of like a cinematic experience almost. I don't think games had really gone down that road. It's so funny to look at it now because it's so primitive, but at the time it felt like you were really in this Black Mesa world.
Ja, schwer nachzuvollziehen. Leider.
Pre-disaster survived from the first year, so a lot of that geometry was from that first version of the game, but in a very minimal way, right? Just the basic style of some of the hallways, the curved corners in the hallways, things like that. They more became sort of like Lego pieces that John could use and stitch together and extrude. And I know Brett did a lot of the raw geometry from pre-disaster, and then John did most of the work to ship it, and then the post and the train ride was all John, I think.
The Sector C, so those are heavily influenced by NASA control rooms. With my favorite green hammerite, really influenced a lot of we started with the kind of the consoles. I'm trying to remember, and then there was just lots of hallways and people were getting lost, and I did the color stripes to help people follow them places.
Ach, echt? Auf die habe ich nie geachtet, auf diese Streifen.
A lot of it really was. The lunchroom with the microwave, you press the button and it would go splat.
My God, what are you doing?
Yeah, all this work so you can start a microwave and blow up some soup, which was a reference to real life, because that happened regularly. Like, we regularly accidentally blew up.
Ladle mostly, wasn't it?
There were a few people who were just, challenged with kitchen appliances, and at one point we had a company fire. We had a lot of things going on in that kitchen.
All of that stuff had a real kind of eloquence that in the late 90s, in a world where everything was so over the top, but we still got to go on flights of fancy.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV.
I think like a super pivotal moment for me was when we came in this one morning and we saw the test chamber sequence that Kelly and John Guthrie and Wedge was in that office, and Dario Driller, they were all in this corner dark office where so much cool stuff happened. But so Kelly and John stayed up all night and did the test chamber sequence, and it's pretty much like the one we shipped.
I mean, that was a lot of what went on in that room that we called the submarine. It was just improvisation, just what can we do to solve this problem? How do we connect what's happening before to what's happening after? This needs to be somehow important, but we just don't know what to do. John and I talked about it. I went home that night and I sort of sketched out maybe we could do something cinematic. We'll take the camera away, we'll turn the lights off, we'll do sounds, we'll just throw everything we can at it. We built that basically that day. It was just a sort of a one-day throw it together. That's how fast we were moving.
They had audio, right? We had
yeah,
the script.
yeah. It's like the heartbeat and the breathing, all that stuff was in there. And I played through it, and it was like, damn, I have not seen this in any medium, in anything before, experienced something like this, where this immersive experience of this actually happening like this. And at that point, it's like, okay, I see what it is we're doing. And it's this kind of immersive, unbroken experience that happens to you, the player. And then that was this key principle about how, we never take you out of that role.
Personally, the difference between before the disaster sequence and after the disaster sequence, I felt I had an understanding that this product was going to be special, or it was going to be possible, it was going to be tied together. Whereas before that, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of little things all disconnected.
Auch mit den Farben und so, ne? Dass teilweise sich wirklich schon die Räume umfärben, dynamisch und sowas alles, haben die alles dazu programmiert. Das konnte Quake damals nur sehr wenig.
But you guys managed to tie two very different parts of the game together really well, and I thought, okay, now I feel like we're on a track for finishing this product. To me, it shifted my brain to have a lot of confidence that this product's coming together rather than just generating a lot of content that exists independently of other content.
One of the ways we were funding our development was we sold a preview copy of Half-Life 2, a video card company, I forget which one. And so they had in their contract that we had to deliver it to them by a certain date. And we got like the first 3 levels done for them. It was really a good milestone for us, just from working as a company, because hey, there was a deliverable. We got it done, and we shipped it off to them. And then I swear the next day it leaked.
Lol, das ist halt, weißt du, du hast einen Vertrag mit jemandem, wahrscheinlich geht es da auch gleich um mehrere Millionen und sowas alles, mit irgendeinem Hersteller von Grafikkarten. Er sagt jetzt nicht welcher. Aber es gibt ja nicht so viele damals. Matrox, Nvidia, ATI, vielleicht noch S3 oder so. Und dann wird es nächsten Tag geleakt. Was eine Schweinerei, ey.
And I was just livid at first, which was stupid. But I was just like, I can't believe you guys let this get out. Like, this wasn't us, And then it turned into something amazing where people started playing it. And it was all over, and we started, seeing it, online, what people were thinking about it. And I forget which magazine who said, usually we don't review, beta software, but they reviewed it and said, this is awesome. And that gave us a tremendous amount of confidence. It was an outside validation of what we were trying to do, that it was the right thing.
Und dennoch behaupten, wir waren das nicht. Naja, weiß ja nicht.
I think just with first-person shooters already, they were kind of like the vowels of weapons you put into first-person. You got to have a shotgun, and there's obviously a pistol. You know, you need your weapon that's going to make you struggle and you drive you to get another weapon.
That was a lesson in how to make all of your weapons as orthogonal as possible, so each one did something completely different. All of the crazy weapons, those are my fault. So I did like the rocket launcher and the Gauss gun and the snarks.
Oh, I like snarks. Snarks always made me laugh. It was just always funny to watch people run away from the snarks.
The squeak grenade. It's called the snark, but I wanted something, little creature that you could bring up and hold, and you could throw it out, and it would just start running. Because people were camping, and everybody hated campers at that point. So you wanted the anti-camp weapon. But it was kind of, you could literally find a little hidey hole and just sit out there and just throw out 30 of them. And they're all over the map. I had a cat. And you'd sit there, you do your finger blue. Yeah, you do your finger towards him, and he'd get mad at you and he'd swat. So that was the inspiration for that particular animation. And then the other, that big alien creature with the, we needed some kind of alien weapon. Drew that one, built that one, animated that one, but that was also another one that whenever you could get in a corner and just shoot them in the air because the hornets would track. I think that was the biggest thrill, is brainstorming these
leicht unfair
your
Multiplayer,
crew,
wenn jemand die
making
Waffe
them,
hat.
building them, putting them in the game, and then playing with them, and then they're fun.
So there's sort of a trope of having a melee weapon. I think it was Steve Bond and Ken Birdwell and I were saying we wanted a device where the world was reacting to. It really goes back to that theory of fun. But we were just running around like idiots, smacking the wall. It's an odd thing to know in retrospect, but at the time it felt profoundly satisfying to be able to smack walls. And that was just an example of how that fairly abstract notion of what fun was ended up translating into a set of decisions that were really visceral. When you're going around whacking a wall, a crowbar is an obvious thing to whack the wall with.
Ja, für a single person. Eine Person hat die Soundeffekte gemacht. Krass. Alles? He also helped design some levels.
If the sound could let you know what's going to happen, that's really makes it powerful. So we're always on the lookout for that in level design, in monster design, communicating, because the AI is often hidden from the player. So we use the sound to broadcast the internal state of the AI. You know, soldiers, they tell you, I'm injured, I'm going to throw a grenade, I'm taking cover. You know, they are broadcasting as constantly as they can what's about to happen. So it was really important to try to keep those states distinct so that as you play the game, you're actually, whether you're aware of it or not, you're starting to be able to tell what's about to happen.
We knew he was a musician too, so he could do sounds, but you know, he also decided he was going to write the sound engine. And then he wrote the soundtrack. And he'd never written a soundtrack before, and he wrote the whole, soundtrack for the game, and it won an award, and it was crazy.
There just weren't that many of us.
Multitalent, Alter. Leveldesigner, alle Sounds aufnehmen, Soundtrack schreiben, obwohl er es noch nie vorher gemacht hat. Der Typ ist krass.
I had a little bit of a background playing music. I understood the sound engine really well, so it was really easy for me to just hook sounds in, and I understood enough about the level design side that I could kind of connect those things a little bit. The sounds could come from anywhere, and then I just heavily modified them. Usually those are animal sounds, reversing, changing the pitch, chopping them up and rearranging them. Head crabs were rats. The little squeaky, yeah, that's a rat slowed way, way down and then reversed.
Ach so, das waren mal Ratten im Design.
Yeah, the DSP stuff was another cool thing that Kelly built. When you got an event, it sounded like you were an event, and that wasn't really happening, I guess, at least in Quake and other games I was playing back then.
We had these huge silos, these cavernous spaces. The day they had their own echoey DSP, made an enormous difference, right? You believe the space.
Kelly tells me, oh God, Chuck Jones asked him if the characters could speak and have their mouths move. And Kelly said, that's super easy. I could just look at the audio and see if they're talking and do that. But like getting their mouth to move is stupid, he says to me. And I look, Chuck Jones told me the same thing. I told him making the mouths move was super trivially easy, but knowing when they're talking and knowing how to follow the envelope of the speech would be impossible. And Kelly and I just both looked at each other and like, oh. And so I went back to my office and he went back to his office. And I think within an hour, the characters were talking and their mouths were moving. And it was only because we sat there at lunch bitching about an animator who was 100% right.
Why are you leaving me here?
Scientist
Das ist
conversations.
halt krass, du kannst halt die Mundbewegung mit so einem einfachen Gesichtsausdrücken einfach an dem Audioausschlag angleichen, sage ich mal, ne?
Kelly and I made that. When they're next to each other, one scientist will occasionally play a question and the other one will give him an answer. And it's not a script, It just it might not always make sense.
I am rather looking forward to this analysis, aren't you? I don't think so.
But it had a bunch of personality. It was really cool. And I worked on getting those guys to look at you and turn their heads.
When we first added the ability for scientists to respond to the player and other things in the environment, I would call them response rules. The first time that went in, they came flying down the elevator, and one of them looks at you and goes, "Oh, hello, Gordon." And then they explode into a pile of jibs at the bottom.
Hello, the automatic diagnostic and analysis system Black Mesa Research Facility. Remember, have a secure day.
During Half-Life's first year of development, the level designers had been building geometry in isolation.
I hadn't really started working on the biggest part of the game, which I ended up shipping, which was surface tension, prior to then. A lot of the work that I had done was the alien research labs, which turned into questionable ethics, and all of that was ditched. There were some concepts made it through, everything was rebuilt from zero. But you know what did make it through was Power Up. Yeah, basically that geometry survived completely intact. It was so closely designed for that creature that because the creature survived, the levels survived along with it. Yeah, there's this sort of central circular thing where you have to rotate the train, and you have to kill the Gargantua first because he was always defending the way out. And then you have to go to like another area which looks very much like it was designed for Quake, because pretty much it was. There was a flooded pump room, and you have to drain the generator, and then you can switch the power on, and then you can take the train out. Yeah, I remember him being totally central to this whole thing. And then, well, how do we block the player? Which is, I mean, that's pretty much like design point number one for all level design. Okay, well, how do we prevent the player from just walking straight out through the exit? And you design backwards from there.
In the first year, we built a lot of world space, a lot of track as we call it, and the programmers would try to fit the AI into the existing maps. What we did the second year was we built the AI in very constrained environments that showcase the AI. Let's make the ideal space for the AI and then give that to the level designers to incorporate those elements into their map so that it worked better and was more interesting. And that Gargantua was an example of that. And the grunts especially.
Yeah, we had the AI that Steve had been working on, and he had designed all these interesting encounters with them just in his test map, and so he had them up high and down low, and so basically we just sort of re-leveraged that. So, okay, let's start with the player comes in low, and there's a Marine on the same level, and then the next one they're up high, and then they come running down, because it was really neat to see them retreat. They'd try to run back up the stairs and try to flank you from another side.
So Steve Bond, like I mentioned earlier, was the...
Das ist halt, man guckt das jetzt hier so selbstverständlich, aber das ist halt für die Zeit absoluter Wahnsinn im Vergleich zu anderen Spielen. Quake war ja nichts anderes als Doom, vom Prinzip her. Du warst der Player, die Gegner sind auf dich zugerannt, weil sie dich angegriffen haben, fertig. Und du musstest die abknallen und noch ein paar Secrets finden. Aber das hier ist eine komplett neue Generation, aus dem Boden gestampft, mit Leuten, die noch nie ein Spiel teilweise programmiert haben. Wahnsinn.
This really young guy who had been making mods in Quake C, really the designer for so much of the AI. I mean, all the stuff that's good about the soldiers, the grunts you fight in Half-Life.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a language we could sort of use to say, this is a place they can climb. This is a place they can jump to. This is a good place to hide. These are good places to go in general, or interesting places. So, the AI had a little bit of help.
Alles hat ein Sounddesigner erschaffen.
Trying to build something that utilized, the train technology that Jay was working on. And we thought, well, let's give the player something that they can control, but in a limited way. We couldn't do vehicles like you see in Half-Life 2. So we did the most constrained vehicle we could think of, which was the train. Players didn't always bring the train with them. And so you had a bunch of these poor people walking down these tunnels.
Oh, is that why you electrified the
rail?
Yeah,
and the rails, that was part of the feedback.
Kept dying from that.
Part of the feedback was, well, you can just bypass all that, so we made the rails electric. It's like, well, maybe that'll teach them to bring the train with them. But the basic idea is, let's explore that, and then also reveal some of the hidden deep parts of the base, the abandoned areas where you might get a lot more of the Zen creatures. We had designed some of the ones that didn't make it into the game to appear there, bats that would dive bomb you, and while you're on the train, Stuka bats, and then we also tried hard to not make it feel like it was the super linear thing, so we tried to give little branches, and so there were some challenges there.
Da war bei mir vorbei. Spätestens der Außenbereich mit der Performance, da war bei mir komplett vorbei. Ich musste in den Himmel gucken, um überhaupt 20 Frames zu haben. Wahnsinn.
Well, there's a really good sketch that Kelly Bailey made, which basically charted surface tension, and it was pretty extensive. Like, it went through the cliffside, and it went through areas where tanks were, and like a lot of soldier holdouts. Yeah, it even went through the desert with the cactuses and the helicopters, and then across a dam. It was pretty extensive. Yeah, when I saw that sketch, I was so motivated to just start building all of that stuff.
So I ran ahead with a lot of level design, a lot of geometry, and it seems like a lot of it stuck in some way or another, which is really amazing. I did the dam, which was funny. I just did that in a day. Like, it was like about 4 or 5 hours. I did a Hoover Dam thing because I like the Hoover Dam.
I saw a concept of the cliffside. I think Harry Teasley built that render of the skybox. Yes. And I just thought, holy crap, this is perfect for Vertigo. Like, whatever we do here, we have to play on Vertigo and like narrow little edges and places you would like to normally dodge a grenade that you can't.
Auf so einem Monitor in der Auflösung nicht mehr nachvollziehen. Aber damals müsst ihr euch vorstellen, die Hintergründe waren irgendwas um die 300 Pixel und die meisten haben das auch auf 300 Pixel gespielt. Und dann war das auf einmal so ein richtiger Erweckungsmoment, wo du da durchgekommen bist. Und das ein Bild war auf einem Röhrenmonitor. Das war alles noch für Röhre ausgelegt. Man sagt ja auch immer bei den älteren Konsolenspielen, dass man die unbedingt mal auf dem Röhrenfernseher spielen soll, weil die dann eine ganz andere plastische Tiefe haben. Und so ist es auch hier. Das kann man hier überhaupt nicht nachvollziehen.
And that's the moment. That's really the big part of that level, is that reveal. And the play is kind of supports it afterward. Yeah. The helicopter comes in, you're fighting the helicopter, which is awesome.
First of all, I had a bunch of textures, and then every time I made new ones, whoever was working on the new levels would be like, oh, fresh textures, I'm going to use those. Somebody making another level would start using them, and I was like, no, this is chaos. We need to restrict this. So I started naming the texture sets by the level that they were made for. I was trying to enforce some sort of like visual cohesion, and so that really ended up working.
There was one level. Ja, das ist halt, wenn du mit Anfängern zusammenarbeitest, die stürzen sich da drauf, die haben da richtig Bock drauf. Aber da musst du natürlich eine Struktur reinfinden, sonst würde das hier aussehen wie eine Disco wahrscheinlich.
Level I did, it was the introduction of the sort of the bounce pads, the alien bounce pads in the real world. Because, you know, story-wise, like, okay, you're getting closer to hitting the alien world. So I was, well, let's get a little bit of alien world infection into the real world. So I had done it just as a visual thing. John Guthrie made it 10 times better. And that's actually where he found the photo of my daughter, because I didn't put my daughter in Gordon's locker. I hid her in like this destroyed office someplace, you know, as a little Easter egg for myself. And John went and put my daughter's photo in Gordon's locker, which I think was a good decision.
I still get questions about stuff that I spent 5 minutes on 25 years ago from people who've now thought about this for 25 years, and they're thinking that there's 25 years worth of development went into this. I'm like, on some level, when you start talking about lore, I'm like, well, there's Black Mesa. That was just a matter, we needed a name for something that was evocative.
In that entrance, when you get off the train and there's that lobby where there's a big map on it, and when we were making that map, that was fairly early on, I put a dot in New Mexico. And then that turned into, I think Mark saw that, he was like, oh, where is that? This is where we are. And then he named it Black Mesa.
That is a favorite thing of mine, actually. If you come up with a name for something and it evokes something, then you don't have to write the whole story. It's because it's a conspiracy plot. Everybody knows more about it than you do, so you don't have to answer those questions. You just keep raising questions and make the mystery kind of thing.
Like dialogue came in later. Also, a lot of the scripted sequences came in later, and those helped to kind of sharpen the storytelling aspect of it, because, I mean, setting expectations to get up to the surface and then like, oh no, they're not here to help us.
The whole thing about diegetic writing, right? Like keeping the exposition in the game instead of outside the game. You know, I give a lot of credit to Mark.
After play tests, we'd realized that maybe you need more of a dialogue cue about something.
That's when we started to do like scientists who were literally pop up in a corner and go that way. There's a few of those that we stuck in right at the end when we'd like, well, we get one more session with Hal. He can say, go down here, you know, go around that corner.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong.
I knew Hal from San Francisco as an artist, cartoonist. He was also an animator and an actor in some science fiction movies. So when we got down to the wire, we did a bunch of voice casting and nothing was right. And I just kept thinking of Hal. And I finally just called him and said, Hal, I want you to at least talk to people here so they can hear your voice. And I got him on a speakerphone, and I had a bunch of people gathered in my office. And I'm like, okay, Hal, everybody's here. And he's like, well, what would you like me to say? And everybody was like, this is him. This is the guy.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Another interesting voice thing was the G-Man. So we liked Mike Shapiro's work. So we knew we wanted to use him, but we brought him in to do Barney and also the G-Man. So we did a take on all the G-Man lines with kind of a straight voice, and it was thinking that, okay, we have something safe, but we're not super excited about it, and give us something else. And he does this crazy lizard voice.
The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed.
And we took it back, and everybody just loved the crazy lizard voice, and so that's how it worked out.
Did you do the Nihilanth?
I did.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Nihilanth. Just imagine his head floating in space as a baby.
Ach, der hat den eingesprochen. Oh, ich fand den jetzt wieder so scheiße. Ich krieg's nicht hin. Development und Half-Life entered its final month. The team was scrambling to get it finished. Das glaube ich, ey.
I went into Gabe's office and I demanded Gabe to either fire Ken or I quit. And Gabe just laughed at me.
Correct response from Gabe.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Until Bill got there, I was the oldest guy there. It was hard because, you know, I had to go home in the evenings, whereas the kids who just The young guys who just moved out from Florida or wherever, they did not have to go home in the evenings. I'd go home, see my kids when they were in bed. I would come back down the hill to Valve. Nobody else I worked with had to get up to get their kids off to school in the morning, but I did.
You're wired to just take full advantage of the situation. You put everything into it. So when we say we worked 18-hour days, that's no exaggeration.
Yeah. 18 Stunden am Tag, ey. Oh. Aber die Leute hatten halt Bock, ne?
Not at all. I can edit all day. I can design all day. I don't have to worry about anything. You know, 2 guys from Microsoft start a game studio with a bunch of incredibly capable, with an incredible team. You're gonna push yourself harder than ever before.
I don't usually crunch real hard. I get it done in I come in, I work, I go home, and a lot of people were living really long hours. The classic, well, come in at 1 and then goof around for a while and then work late into the late at night. I was employee 17. There was a woman that was the kind of the office manager, and eventually Mona Lisa Guthrie came in at the desk. I was the only woman on the team. That was not awesome.
I decided to become a bass.
Ja, aber das war damals ja noch krasser als heute. Damals waren es alles Kerle. Immer Kerle. Und das hat sich so lange durchgetragen, dass es heute noch schwerfällt, da mal einen Wandel zu finden.
Baseball fan here after the birth of my first daughter. So she's the one in Gordon's locker,
Aww.
Isabel. But she was, she's very special needs. She's 25 today. Cognitively, she's about 3 years old. So after her birth, in the middle of Half-Life production, it was really hard. It was really hard because we were getting about 2 hours of sleep at a stretch because she had to be fed through a tube in her stomach every 2 hours. I had to just...
Boah, stellt euch mal vor, euer Kind ist schwer gesundheitlich geschädigt, aber ihr sitzt da und entwickelt an dem Spiel, ey. Scheiße.
Just a difficult time relating to the world when she was a baby. I had a hard time just talking to people because I was just kind of tired and angry all the time. Yeah, my wife, she worked at Valve for a while. She did a bunch of textures for the game. Like I say, she did those soda machines. She did just a bunch of level textures. She textured Big Mama, the sort of boss creature. She textured him. But when Isabel arrived, she obviously had a lot of issues. So Yachts had to stop working and stay with her at home. And it was the last year of Half-Life, and we pretty much crunched that whole year. So I was at work a lot. It was hard. It was definitely a hard year.
Krass. Und man denkt ja immer, ja, das geht schon irgendwie vorbei und so. Aber man sieht schon durch diese spezielle Situation, dass ihn das heute noch hart beschäftigt. Ey.
Games have often had this thing where they're just a little too attached to Star Wars, Blade Runner, Aliens. So it wasn't that hard to try to get people to go, let's think of something really alien. Like what Zen was initially was you're gonna go inside a huge alien organism and kill it or figure out how to turn it on or off or something like that. I didn't know we couldn't actually do that or what was involved.
What does it mean to have alien architecture or a planet that's biologically defining the structures in it, as opposed to what the tools were good at, which is making rectangles?
And then slowly it scaled back till it was more and more corridors, and that everybody was really good at.
People were finishing up stuff and I was still working on Zen because it was like it went through a lot of iteration, or at least we're trying to figure out what it was. Different people were taking swings at it, either in static concepts.
Weren't you under a bit of a timeline crunch for it as well?
Yeah, it was the end of the game.
Yeah.
I wanted to cut stuff out and they're like, no, leave it in. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have any support for this.
Right.
And then after a lot of it was built, is like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the gravity and give you a jump pack. That came later. And I was like, ah.
There's a lot of stuff, especially in Zen, where you're getting close to a first draft of some things, right? Because we just didn't have time, and we got to the end of the game. And so we considered not going to Zen, but the art concepts people did were so cool.
For the Zen textures, I was deeply inspired by electron microscope imagery, and we had so much of that regular structural texture material that I wanted to do something more organic. Insects as well. I think there's a lot of textures that were based on beetles. That was really fun and incredibly challenging levels to make, because that editor was not friendly for organic shapes.
I built the little behaviors for the tree that hits you if you get too close, and the light stalk that kind of hides. But Ken did a bunch of AIs there, the floating controller guys.
And the flying guys were great, but you had to set up air nodes for them to travel properly. I prototyped a lot, and some of those prototypes were used in the final battle, I believe, and also for the Gonard, which I think Randy did.
We, at some point, have to stop polishing. At some point, we have to, like, it is what it is. And if the player hasn't had fun up until that point, well, then we failed. They're not going to get to that point, so who cares? It just has to finish, and it did.
Yeah, and there's always Half-Life 2 to win them back.
I love that sensation of being alone in an alien dimension, but the experience that people really liked in the game was scientists pop up and Barney pops up and you have companions and you have this feeling of companionship around you with all the other stuff that's going on. So a lot of people miss that, which I understood, and I think if we'd had thought about the ending from the beginning, we would have figured out some ways to do that a little more.
Aber dann hätte das bedeutet bestimmt noch mal ein halbes Jahr weitere Entwicklung, und ich glaube, die Leute waren da einfach platt. November 19th. Und wir bringen dieses Video am 19. November. So schön kann es manchmal sein.
I remember coming back from downtown Cabo very drunk and then running to the beach, but didn't know there was like a 6-foot retaining wall there, so I just went right over. And then I was hurting so much I slept the night where I fell. Yeah, I woke up the next morning.
I had never heard that
a really
story.
Stiff neck.
Oh my God. It's a good thing you were pretty young.
I remember after we'd gone final on the game, I was home one morning, taking a shower, and my wife asked me, like, it's done. Is it any good? Is the game any fun? Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so.
I don't think it's exaggerating by saying if any one of the crew had disappeared for a month, we wouldn't have shipped. It didn't matter who they were. Everybody was mission critical.
My inspiration from Valve, what I really took away with me was that the thing that is most important to me is, what are we making? Coming in as a texture artist, you don't have a lot of expectation that you're going to get to influence that. And I was able to have quite a bit of influence on the what.
It was so fun to work with the people who were making Half-Life. The collection of people were diverse, at least like in their professional backgrounds, was kind of all over the place. And so figuring out how to work with all those people, but also just the fact that we had hired really stellar people who were good at collaborating, like they're conscientious people, deeply passionate about what they wanted to create. That just was a recipe for a professionally, like, really good time.
It seems to me that one of the things that good games do is make 2 games worth of stuff and then throw away the bad game. And fortunately, like, Valve was able to do that. A lot of companies couldn't do that, but backstopped by Gabe and Mike, Valve could afford to do that.
I always have absolutely nothing interesting to say when people say, would you reflect on your legacy? Like, I really don't look back a whole lot. I'm always excited by the future, right? So to me, it's like I can look back at the things we did, but to me, they're just sort of like the stepping stones to what we're going to be able to do in the future. That's just how I'm wired, right?
Oh Mann, ey, der Multiplayer. Spiel mal vom Server gekickt. 56K Modem hat. Ja, Mann. Meine Kindheit. Oder? Ich hab so oft verloren. Aber wahrscheinlich. Opposing Force. Geiles Ding. Wirklich geiles Ding. Also ich hatte sehr viel Spaß dabei. Ich habe auch nicht viel geredet, weil ich das einfach nur genießen wollte, das Ding. Oh. Oh, geil. Ivan the Space Biker and Friends. Now available in Half-Life Deathmatch. Sehr geil. Ach, schön. Es war einfach schön. Ich wollte euch mitnehmen. Ist mir auch egal, wie erfolgreich dieses Video ist. Aber sowas lässt mir das Herz aufgehen. Das waren meine Games. Okay, Leute. War lang genug. Ich hoffe, ihr hattet trotzdem ein bisschen Spaß. Ich hatte es auf jeden Fall. Es war fantastische Dokumentation. Und auch ein bisschen traurig leider, aber so ist das Leben nun mal manchmal. So, ich wünsche euch einen wunderschönen guten Tag, Mittag oder Abend. Bis zum nächsten Mal und ciao.